Good morning and welcome to the first Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. My name is Reverend Sam Trumbore. Before we begin, please check to make sure your microphone is muted. The same for your camera if your image is potentially distracting. Please also be mindful of your speech while on Zoom, as microphones unfortunately have a way of getting accidentally unmuted. This will minimize any disruption of our service, and thanks so much for your cooperation. This is now a time of transition from ordinary time to sacred time. Time to check in with your body, to collect your attention and be present in this moment. Let this moment be separated from earlier and later. May this virtual space become a sanctuary for the next hour. Allow your screen to transform into a virtual community hall to experience images, sounds, and music, songs, poetry, and prose that will lift your heart, broaden your mind, and move you to do justice in the world in the service of building beloved community. May this virtual service be holy time for each of us that joins us together in the celebration of life. Our prelude this morning, Planting Seeds of Love by Pam Donkin, and our musician is Randy Rosette. Thank you, Randy. And let us light our chalice this morning with the words that you'll find appearing on the screen very, very soon. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. And a chance for us to sing together as tranquil streams. And song leaders are Chris and Randy. And our wisdom story this morning is called One by Catherine Otoshi, and it's presented by Leah.
Most days, but there were some days that he felt daring. And then he enjoyed splashing in rain puddles. Every once in a while, he wished he could be more sunny like yellow, or bright like green, more regal like purple, or outgoing like orange. But overall, he liked being blue. That is, except when he was with Red. Red was a hothead. He liked to pick on Blue. Red is a great color, he say. Red is hot, blue is not. And then Blue would feel bad about being blue. Sometimes Yellow comforted Blue. Blue is a very nice color, she'd say. But Yellow never said that in front of Red. She never said, "Stop picking on Blue." The other colors, green, purple, and orange, they thought Blue was nice too, but they never told Red to stop either. And here's the thing. Every time Red said something mean and no one spoke up, he got bigger and bigger and bigger. Then he picked on all the colors, and then everyone felt a little blue. Well, that was until one came. He had a different shape with bold strokes and squared corners. He was funny. He made the colors laugh. When Red saw this, he got very hot, and he rolled up to the group. And he went up to each one and said to them, "Stop laughing." He said it to Yellow. "Stop laughing," he told Green. "Stop laughing," he told Purple and Orange. And they did. Red rolled up to one. "Stop laughing," he told him. But one stood up straight like an arrow and said, "No." Red was mad, but one wouldn't budge, so Red rolled away. And then one turned to the colors and said, "If someone is mean and picks on me, I for one stand up and say no." Then Yellow felt brave and said, "Me too." Green agreed and said, "Me 3." And then Purple became 4 and Orange became 5. Blue saw the colors change. He wanted to count. But Red had grown very hot. He felt left out. He grew hotter and hotter and hotter. He raced over to Blue and said what he always did. "Red is hot, blue is not." But this time, Blue stood up tall and became 6. "Red can be really hot," he said, "but blue can be super cool." Then Red tried to run over Blue, and the others all stood around and said no. Seeing them stand up tall made Red feel very, very, very small, and he got even redder and rolled away. But Blue called out, "Can Red be hot and Blue be cool?" Red stopped in his tracks. "Red can count too," said one. Red rocked and rolled and turned into 7. "Everyone counts," they shouted. Then Red laughed and joined in the fun. You see, sometimes it takes just one. And that's the end of our story. And doesn't this remind us of our first Unitarian Universalist principle? The story reminds us that we all count and what we do counts.
All right. Welcome to our Facebook viewers, to our service at First Albany UU. Well, we can count Can we count? We can count on Leah to remind us of what counts. And you count too. It all adds up to a bigger number than any of us. Glad we can count on having you with us here this morning. You may have noticed the chicken featured on our slides this morning. There can be a temptation to count your chickens before they hatch. Today's reading is about chickens and eggs. I found it in Dr. David Sloan Wilson's book, This View of Life, Completing the Darwinian Revolution. I first heard him describe this experiment almost 7 years ago when he did a workshop in our congregation. Well, I don't approve of caged chicken egg production. This experiment described can be a powerful metaphor for developing healthy community. Here begins the reading. Consider an experiment that was performed on chickens by William Muir and his colleagues at Purdue University's Department of Animal Sciences in the 1990s. Their goal was to increase the egg-laying productivity of hens. Chickens evolved to live in flocks, but in the modern poultry industry, they're often housed in cages with 5 to 9 hens per cage. So the study was focused on maximizing production in this environment. The design was simple. They monitored how many eggs each hen laid. The most productive hens from each cage were used to breed the next generation, and so on for about a number of generations. If the trait of egg productivity was heritable, then this method should substantially increase egg productivity over a number of generations. But that's not what happened. Instead, the subsequent generations laid fewer eggs and became more aggressive toward each other. This image shows one of the cages after the experiment had been in progress for 5 generations. The cage originally housed 9 hens, but 6 were murdered, and the survivors had plucked each other's feathers. The most productive hens in each cage achieved their productivity by bullying the other hens. Bullying behavior is heritable in chickens, so selecting the biggest bullies led to a strain of hyper-aggressive hens within 5 generations. The energy expended and stress induced by their constant attacks on each other caused all of them to lay fewer eggs. In the same experiment, there was another experiment performed in parallel with this first one. Egg productivity was monitored at the level of whole cages. Instead of breeding the most productive hens within each cage, all of the hens from the most productive cages were selected to breed the next generation. Here are the hens from this experiment after 5 generations. All 9 hens are alive and fully feathered, and their egg productivity increased 160% during the course of this experiment. These 2 experiments provide beautiful examples of within group and between group selection as envisioned by Darwin. The first one highlights the advantage that selfish traits have over cooperative traits within single groups. The chickens in the first image, tormenting and killing each other for their own gain, exhibit traits we would certainly call evil. The second experiment highlights the need for selection at the group level to evolve the traits that enable everyone within the group to thrive. The chickens in the second image, living amicably, with each other exhibit traits and behaviors we would certainly call good. The number of eggs laid by an individual chicken is not an individual trait so much as it is a social trait, because it depends on how members of the group behave toward each other. So end the reading. Let us turn inward to contemplate these words by the Reverend Peter Morales, slightly adapted. Please consider this morning that deep spirituality can feel like connection. Connection to yourself, to others around you, to the earth, and to all of creation. Connection to yourself can feel like deep peace, awareness, calm, authenticity. Connection to others can feel like compassion, community, acceptance, and enduring love. In this sense of spirituality is not an idea, it is an experience. In this experience of connection, dividing lines disappear. Inner conflict gives way to integrity. The line that separates your individuality from others fades. You become one. You find connections with your deepest self in solitary practice and reflection. You find connection with others in community and in worship. This kind of connection with creation, with the earth and the cosmos can be difficult. Artificial controlled environments separate us. We live separated from the natural world, the world from which we emerged and that sustains our lives. Just for this moment, may we let go of striving to control our world and allow ourselves to become one with it. Just for this moment, may we find ourselves in losing ourselves and really connect. When that happens, may it change everything. And let us take these words and our own thoughts, reflections, and prayers into a time of silent meditation. Poor Darwin has been so misunderstood when it comes to social evolution. You probably heard survival of the fittest applied to individuals within a social setting. This is an inappropriate application of Darwin's ideas that have justified eugenics, colonialism, and predatory capitalism. Especially here in America, it has permitted a narcissistic leader to claim power and harm the social fabric of our nation. Put too many narcissists together and you get the first chicken experimental result. The dead chickens are usually the altruistic ones. There are no winners, only losers in the evolutionary process of group selection. Humans are not rugged at all. We have no fur to keep us warm. Our muscles are weak for our size compared to other predators. Our digestive systems are adapted for cooked, ground, and chopped food. We're easily poisoned by plant toxins. We need a lot of technology, such as knives, spears, grinding tools, cooking utensils, clothing, and shelter just to survive. Childbirth is extremely dangerous for women. Babies need a great deal of care for a long time before they can fend for themselves. The only way we've been able to survive as a species is because we've lived in groups. Rather than the slow process of genetic adaptation, those groups have developed culture. Culture has more quickly adapted them to their environment. Without culture, the Inuit in Canada would perish very quickly. In the frozen north, there is little fuel for fires to keep them warm and little to eat in the winter. Hunting and preparing food requires a great deal of skill. Nabbing a seal as it comes up to a hole in the ice to breathe is no easy trick. And you'd need to know not to eat toxic polar bear liver, even if you can kill one. I know I'm not going to go 101 with a polar bear. The English expedition of 1845, led by Sir John Franklin, got caught in the ice looking for the Northwest Passage. They had to abandon ship when their supplies ran out and camp on King William Island in 1848. Eventually, everyone died because they didn't know how to survive in such a harsh climate. 15 years before the Franklin expedition, the Victory, the ship, had to be abandoned too, with a crew of 22. They lived for 3 years on that same island before being rescued. They survived by befriending the local Inuit who cared for them and taught them how to thrive as they did. Only 2 men were lost. Darwin recognized that within a group, individuals might compete with each other for mates, resources, and group leadership. The survival of the group, however, was determined by how the group worked together. The group's fitness depended on the individuals in the group putting the well-being of the group ahead of their own. If they did that, the committed group could survive much better than a group of individuals who only were concerned about themselves. Darwin claimed this was the reason for the evolution of altruism, which creates strong group cohesion. Altruism helped these cohesive groups survive much better than groups dominated by selfish individuals. And since human beings are so dependent on groups for their individual survival, altruistic genes got selected over selfish genes. What is critical to understand here is evolution has demonstrated so far that altruistic groups survive much better than individualistic groups. This should be obvious just looking around us at sports teams, successful corporations, nations, religious groups, cooperatives, etc. What makes our congregation thrive is what we give to each other, not what we take. In fact, giving is a virtuous circle where you get back more than you give in satisfaction, meaning, and fulfillment. Now, evolution doesn't have a plan or design for all of this. Evolution didn't have even human beings as a goal. We are the result of what has worked in the past, as well as the problems or misadaptations that haven't been bad enough to be eliminated and got propagated forward. Evolution never stops. It keeps going at a faster and faster pace, enabled by our social technology. A big question evolutionary scientists ask is if there are patterns of what works that we can discern in the evolutionary process. If so, we can use our minds to help us choose adaptations that evolution favors and help humanity thrive rather than self-destruct. A great way to do this is to consider a difficult social problem. Look at how some groups have successfully solved that problem and see if there are any principles that can be derived for general use. One such problem is the problem of the commons. Gerard Hardin published an article posing the problem in the journal Science in 1968. Hardin asked the reader to imagine a village with a common pasture that was available for all of the villagers to graze their cows. The pasture can support only so many cows, but each villager has an individual incentive to add more of his or her cows to the herd, resulting in the tragedy of an overgrazed pasture. Hardin's example became a parable for the problem of managing common pool resources of all sorts, such as pastures, forests, fisheries, irrigation systems, groundwater, the atmosphere. In capitalistic economies that prize self-interest to deal with this kind of problem, the typical economic suggested solution usually comes in two flavors. One is to privatize the land and divide it up among all the stakeholders. The other is to impose top-down regulations. That might work for a pasture, but not so well for a fishery, groundwater, or the atmosphere as we seek to deal with greenhouse gases. Dr. Elinor Ostrom, a political scientist, was very interested in this problem. She decided to survey the world to find places where this resource sharing problem had been solved by the villagers themselves. Sure enough, she found examples of Turkish fishers and Maine lobster gangs who had done just that. These were egalitarian approaches created by the fishers and gangs with general agreement to the principles. Ostrom's great contribution was to deduce 8 core design principles that made the difference between success and failure. For this work, she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009. Curious, are you, about those principles? Here they are. Number 1, strong group identity and understanding the purpose that recognized boundaries, rights, and obligations of being a group member. 2, proportional equivalence between benefits and costs. Those who put in the extra work get the rewards, assuming everyone does their fair share. Fairness is paramount. Fair and inclusive decision-making. Everyone takes part in decision-making, striving for consensus, if possible, to establish agreed-upon behaviors and goals. 4, monitoring agreed-upon behaviors. Everyone must be willing to be monitored and held accountable for lapses and transgressions. 5, graduated sanctions. Holding people accountable begins soft and gradually becomes harder. Most just need a gentle nudge or reminder. The threat of harsher punishment needs to back that up. 6, fast and fair conflict resolution. Inside the group, resolution is far better than appealing to outside authority. 7, local autonomy. The group needs to be able to create its own social organization and make its own decisions, as outlined in number 1 through 6. And finally, 8, polycentric governance. Relationships between subgroups need to follow the same rules and procedures of the larger groups. The institutions in which the group is embedded also need to honor those rules and procedures. While these core design principles were developed for sharing a common resource, they are just as applicable to schools, neighborhoods, churches, voluntary organizations, businesses, nonprofits, and even government agencies. These are principles for how any group can effectively work together. I think they make sense. Any group needs strong identity and a sense of purpose. Individuals in a group want to feel it's worth their effort, energy, and investment. Who doesn't want decision-making to be fair for us and to be part of deciding what affects us, making sure we aren't being harmed by the group? Then it gets a little harder with monitoring and sanctions. But this is how trust and commitment are built and maintained. Fast and fair conflict resolution makes sense for how most of us want to be treated in a group. And finally, a big yes to local autonomy and polycentric governance. What David Sloan Wilson recognized in these 8 core design principles was an alignment with what evolution demands for successful multi-level selection. The principles support and enforce altruistic and pro-social behavior that makes groups much more likely to survive and thrive. The principles make it difficult for an individual group member to benefit at the expense of the group. Ostrom had tapped what Wilson calls the evolutionary dynamics of cooperation in all species and our own history as a highly cooperative species. I find all this very exciting, as healthy, satisfied, and productive group life is what I constantly thinking about for our congregation. I realize it's hard to hold these 8 core design principles in your head and reflect on them right now. What is exciting to contemplate is that there are 8 of them at all. It is exciting to know that groups can begin to use these principles and expect positive results. That expectation is based in principles that have sound theory and real-world experience to back them up. This is like a physicist having a formula to calculate lift, and then she uses it to design a plane and it flies. I am talking about a solid foundation for designing and modifying group structures that are highly likely to be successful. I bring all of this to you today, partly because Darwin's birthday is next week. More importantly, I bring this to you today because it is extremely relevant to the project of building something that we are calling beloved community, the theme for this month. If you haven't read my Windows article for this month, there is some background info on the beloved community idea. Briefly, beloved community has deep origins in Jesus's proclamation of the realm of God that he established on earth in his ministry, which tragically was cut short by Roman terrorism. His followers attempted to realize it in early Christian communities, and unfortunately mostly failed. Every couple of hundred years or so, some community decides to go back to those early ideas of the realm of God and recreate them. We still have those experiments today in Christian communities like the Mennonites and the Amish. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is the latest to adapt Jesus's vision into a universalized vision for all people. Unitarian Universalists have gravitated to it as language for unifying our vision for the kind of world we seek to create here on earth too. This service is the beginning of our exploration of beloved community as Unitarian Universalists are currently working on it. I hope I've stimulated your imagination and your interest in how evolution is relevant to successful groups. Now, these 8 core design principles grounded in evolutionary theory might help us better imagine and realize how to create this kind of community we dream is possible for us and for all people. So stay tuned. We will be returning to this theme in 2 weeks to take some of these ideas I've talked about today, compare them to Dr. King's thinking, and look at how Unitarian Universalists are beginning to put them into practice. Perhaps we'll find some inspiration too for our congregation's new governance model and policy book. I'll end here and turn the baton over to Peggy, and she'll describe the offering.
An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution via one of the options shown on this slide. You can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute, or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide show how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose or intent of your gift. And we now say goodbye to our Facebook viewers. Consider joining us on Zoom next time by visiting albanyuu.org. Our offertory music is Can You Feel the Love Tonight by Elton John and Tim Rice, and it will be presented by Elena Karpov.
This is the time set aside in our service for sharing significant personal milestones in our lives. There are 3 ways to share a joy or sorrow. The first option is to type your joy or sorrow in the chat window. Please put the words "read aloud" at the beginning of your message if you would like us to read it. Please also consider connecting privately in the chat with a pastoral care associate. You may identify the ones on duty today in the participant window. Look for PCA before their name. Today, Donna Meixner and myself are the PCAs. The second option is to click the blue raise hand symbol in the participant window. Our technician will invite you to unmute yourself and speak your joy or sorrow. The third option is to submit a joy or sorrow using our website by noon on Friday prior to the service. We'll begin by reading those that were submitted this past week. Then we'll hear the spoken joys and sorrows, followed by the chat entries that are to be read aloud.
Our first presented joy is from Jay Holly, who shares with us that the assisted living facility where her mom is has had 2 consecutive rounds of COVID testing with no new positive cases. This means that the total lockdown has been lifted and limited family visits can begin again. Also, her mom has received the first dose of vaccine, and this is all very good news. And moving on, we'll start with Kathy Harris. Kathy, go ahead and unmute and share.
I want to say how grateful I am that we live in a time of Zoom. My granddaughter Zinnia turned 3 yesterday, and we were able to watch her open presents and talk to her, though she lost interest pretty quickly, but I was able to talk to my daughter, Laura. And, you know, without all that stuff, I think we would be so isolated and lost. So I'm very grateful for that now.
Thank you. Moving on, Lisa Barron, go ahead, unmute yourself and share.
Hello, I'd like to share a joy. My daughter in New York City has come through a difficult operation very well. She has a very good outlook, and I'm very grateful to Sloan Kettering, did a great job. However, she's in a terrible situation with her roommate who has Alzheimer's and sundowning. So that's making a difficult recovery there, but she'll be home soon, and all that should be much better in her own apartment. So I too am very grateful for Zoom and being together with everyone. It's made such a difference to have good friends here helping out with my outlook and my mood. So thank you all.
And thank you, Lisa. There are no more lives, so we can move on to the chat joys and sorrows.
Great. So the Stones wanted to share that member Mary Alice Maines passed away on Thursday at the age of 91 years old. Then the Hotelans, Tom and Tanya, would like everybody to give prayers for Sue Pilipsuk, who lives in their community. She's been in the hospital ICU since November with heart issues. Carol Pink has a concern about having to move in 2 months and that she has a limited income. Mary Applegate also reports that on February 12th, 1809, both Charles Darwin and Abraham Lincoln were born. A great day for humanity. Christine Carrera says that her nephew, godson Patrick, got engaged, and her niece Madeline, her birthday buddy, celebrated her 5th birthday yesterday. And Christine's daughter Scarlett also turns 17 on this coming Valentine's Day. I believe, That is all I'm seeing. Have I missed anything? I believe that's it, Chris. For all the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, let us hold all that we've heard and felt in our hearts.
Our prayer of affirmation comes from the words of UUA President Susan Frederick-Gray, adapted. And please turn inward to receive these words. Has there ever been a time when you wanted to give up? Have you ever wanted to give up in activism or in ministry? Yes, there have been times when my heart has been so broken by disappointment. Yes, there have been times when the work of building beloved community has felt insurmountable. Yes, there have been times when I cannot deny wanting to throw in the towel. And then I reach out to a colleague, a friend, someone as passionate for justice as I am. She offered me witness. She listened to my grief, my anger, my fear, and she prayed with me and for me. Not a prayer for answers, a prayer for compassion and healing for my own spirit and my heart. The next day, I got up and went back to work. It is a lesson I learn again and again. We don't create any real positive impact alone. Community gives us strength. Love gives us courage. Remembering we are not alone. Remembering the people, the family, the community, the ancestors we belong to, gives us resiliency and power. Power to keep on loving, keep on acting, keep on working for the values and commitments we hold dear. Be held by and renewed by the power of we. So be it. And let us sing our final hymn, We Celebrate the Web of Life. And Elena Karpov is going to perform it for us.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words shown on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And we close with words from Reverend Heather Rian Starr. May whatever gatherings or activities we engage in this Sunday afternoon help restore us, our connections to one another, our sense of hope, beauty, and fun in this world, our deep knowing that we have to take care of ourselves and each other with love and joy if we are to soulfully survive the world's mayhem. And we would like to thank today's ushers, Kristen Abbas, Don Dana, Chuck Manning, and Jean Poppy, our pastoral care associates, Randy Rosette and Donna Meixner, our welcomer, Barb Manning. I served as your service associate, our musicians, Elena Karpov, Randy Rosette, and Chris Jensen, office support from Tammy Hathaway and Elizabeth Valdez, and technical support from Chris Jensen.